For the purposes of preparing your report, did you speak to former Commissioner Doug Schulman?
I did not.
Did you speak to former Acting Commissioner Steve Miller?
I did not.
And did you talk with Joseph Grant, the former Deputy Commissioner for TEGE?
No, I did not.
Did you talk with Chief Counsel William Wilkins?
Yes.
What were the basic summaries of those conversations?
As a first matter, there were three things I set out to do, which are in the report. First, understand where the wrongdoing was so I can hold people accountable. Second, understand where the management failures and process mistakes are in the exempt organizations unit so we can fix them. And third, a broader understanding of IRS risks and operations. And I spoke to many people within the IRS. In fact, my whole senior leadership team engaged in an ongoing series of discussions, and Bill Wilkins is one of the senior leaders within IRS.
Did you talk to Sarah Hall Ingram, the former Deputy Commissioner?
I have spoken to Sarah Hall Ingram, yes.
As you prepared the report? For the purposes of preparing the report, did you speak to her?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I spoke to her as part of my overall understanding of the situation on the ground with the IRS, so yes, I guess they all connect.
Okay, and did you speak with Lois Lerner, the former Director of Exempt Organizations?
I did not.
Well, I would say that your initial conclusion that the IRS found no evidence of intentional wrongdoing by IRS personnel, given the number of key players that you did not talk to, I think is not necessarily an initial conclusion, but an incomplete one. And I really don't see how you were able to reach that. But we know from our investigation that in the summer of 2011, Lois Lerner directed the Cincinnati office to change the words Tea Party label to advocacy groups. Do you think this was an intentional attempt to cover up the targeting?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think more work needs to be done to evaluate the circumstances.
Again, I find it difficult then to make the conclusion that no evidence of intentional wrongdoing by IRS personnel was done. But after
what I'm suggesting is there's no evidence in the record to suggest that there was an intentional cover-up of any kind.
But you didn't even speak to her.
But each time that I've made the point, each time that I've made
Mr. Werfel, I control the time. And my question is, after she directed this change, Cincinnati intentionally went back to targeting Tea Party groups. Do you know who was responsible for this?
Do I know who was responsible? Well, I challenged the premise of your question.
After the change was made to advocacy groups, the Cincinnati office went back to targeting Tea Party groups. Do you know who was responsible for that activity beginning again?
We are looking into the facts and circumstances that arose. There's a lot of questions to be asked and answered that haven't been asked and answered yet, and I'm not going to reach a definitive conclusion before the investigation is complete.
If you don't know, it's fine to say you don't know.
Yeah.
I think the answer is you don't know. Do you know who in Washington, D.C. directed the lawyers at the exempt organization's technical office to hold up the Tea Party applications?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Is the IRS interviewing employees who were directly involved with the Tea Party discrimination at this point?
Right now, the IRS is relying on the Justice Department and the Inspector General to conduct those interviews. We're working closely with them, but it's critical that because there's an ongoing criminal investigation, that we do not step in front of the Justice Department and the IG at this time.
Is the IRS conducting any internal document review outside of complying with the requests that Congress has been sending to the agency?
We are conducting a very thorough document review at this time.
Your report also states that there's no evidence of the use of inappropriate criteria in other IRS business unit operations. And how did you reach that conclusion? Are you interviewing employees in these units and requesting information, or is there?
Yeah, there's the major divisions that are involved in these types of activities of dealing directly with taxpayer issues are our small business section, our large business section, TEGE, which is the subject of the audit report, and wage and investment. I've met with the leaders of those operating divisions. We've talked about the issues in the IG report that dealt with the exempt organizations unit. I've asked them to look internally and do their own assessments of any specific evidence they may have of similar problems or challenges in their areas. They've determined that there are not similar, and there's some good reason for that, and in particular, I think it's important to point out that in this area of tax-exempt review, it's one of the very few areas within the IRS where the nature of political activity is relevant to any determination that we would make on eligibility or review. And so the other areas of the IRS normally don't involve themselves in political activity. All this said, We understand, and I'm like all of you, very concerned about what is in this IG report. It's a very significant concern. We're hearing from taxpayers that they're concerned, and that's why, out of an abundance of caution, and because it's important to reassure the taxpayers, we're going to review all of our criteria across the entire IRS and report back to you on our findings.
So I think this leads into the statement that in the report that the IRS is digging deeper into the evidence, this is a quote, to determine if there are instances of wrongdoing or inappropriate conduct beyond the mismanagement identified in the original report. So that's beyond the exempt organizations division. Is this, in that process, are you reviewing documents requested by Congress, or is there some other internal review in addition to that?
I think there's a lot of overlap, Mr. Chairman. You have asked, this committee and other committees have asked for an enormous footprint of documents, which is very justifiable, and we are in the process of producing them and have produced a lot of documents for this committee and others. We, as part of our efforts to get to the bottom of this, are looking at a very similar footprint of documents in order to make sure that we understand the causes of these circumstances so that we can take the appropriate accountability steps and corrective action.
Well, I would note we're just beginning to get emails, and so it's not as if we have all the documents at our disposal yet that we're going to need to review. But I have another line of questioning. You acknowledged, and your report acknowledges, that the IRS inappropriately targeted Tea Party groups. And since then, there have been questions raised about whether the IRS was inappropriately targeting progressive groups. And I would like to read to you the Treasury Inspector General's answer to this question, which the minority was kind enough to share with me this morning. Quote, we reviewed all cases that the IRS identified as potential political cases and did not limit our audit to allegations related to the Tea Party, end quote. So I'd like to repeat that. TIGTA did not limit its audit to just the Tea Party. And let me just read another excerpt from their answer, their written answer, and quote, from our audit work, we did not find evidence that progressives were used by the IRS to select potential political cases during the 2010 to 2012 timeframe. We found no indication in any materials that progressives was a term used to refer cases for scrutiny for political campaign intervention. So we've conducted interviews with some of the key Cincinnati IRS employees, and they've confirmed that to be true. Does any part of your 30-day report contradict that recent letter and finding by the Inspector General?
No, I don't think any part of our report contradicts it. What our report determines is that there is diversity in the types of political organizations that were accounted for in the BOLO list, and that's all that's in our report.
And the BOLO list is a flagging, and only the conservative Tea Party groups were referred for extra scrutiny. Isn't that correct at this point? That's what we know so far.
I think that's what the evidence points to so far, but as you've mentioned in your opening remarks, we're in the early stages of this, and there's more investigation that needs to be done to answer that very question.
Yes, and the Inspector General is doing a more thorough investigation, but at least in the recent letter he sent us, he said he found no evidence to date, and your report, as you responded, doesn't contradict that. I would ask unanimous consent to place in the record the entire letter that was received on June 26th from the Inspector General regarding this matter,